Happy New Year, everyone! Waddle from Watchwaddle here. Excuse the clutter, I was going through all my cartoon tapes. As you can see, I've accumulated a lot over the years. I figure it's about time I probably organized them all. Guess the best place to start would be at the beginning. Animation, the beginning. This is where us cartoons got our start in film. For an animator, finding this tape is like Indiana Jones finding the Ark of Covenant. Think about it. Some of the projects on this tape are over 100 years old. It's amazing we can still look at these things. This collection on tape includes some of the earliest known stuff from James Stewart Blackton to Emil Cole. We also get to see some magic by comic strip artist Winsor McCay, Little Nemo, and of course, Gertie the Dinosaur. And it also includes some short films from the 1920s by Felix the Cat, Oswald Rabbit, and Disney's first projects, The Laugh-O-Gram. This truly is quite the collection. Would I recommend it to everyone? Not really. I think the magic might be lost on some mainstream audience. Would I recommend it to an animator? Absolutely. It doesn't matter how old these projects are. I think any animator can still learn from them. And that makes these projects truly timeless. I give this tape 3 ducks out of 5. But as an animation enthusiast myself, it gets a full 5. If you like this video, let me know, because I could take a look at a lot more tapes. Until then, this is Waddle from Watchwaddle. Thanks for watching. Welcome back, folks. And today we're looking at another VHS tape, The Spirit of Mickey. This tape came out somewhere in the late 90s, and it was the first physical copy I personally ever owned of Steamboat Willie. I, of course, seen it on television before, and I actually saw it in Disney World and Main Street USA, but this was the first time I owned an actual copy of one. Steamboat Willie is an impressive piece, even to this day. Every time I watch it, I feel like I'm in a picture show in 1928, seeing it for the first time in awe. It's a great film, and I think it's timeless for everybody to watch. The rest of the Mickey Mouse cartoons on this tape are just basic, some good, some not. I was actually surprised to find out how many people find Mickey kind of boring. I don't think he's that boring. I think it's sort of a hit or miss. The tapes are okay. That is with the exception of one. Through the Mirror. This episode of Mickey is got to be my favorite Mickey Mouse cartoon of all time. That is the standalone Mickeys. It actually shows how a basic character like Mickey could actually appear in a cartoon that has free-for-all animation, anything you want going on. Plus, of course, it foreshadowed one of my favorite Disney movies, Alice in Wonderland. I would give this tape 2 ducks out of 5, but since Steamboat Willie and Through the Mirror are on it, it gets at least 4. I say check these out. It's a good place to see where Mickey got his start from. As Walt Disney once said, it was all started by a mouse. 2 words. Tex Avery. You know, it's not often a director can outshine their own movie. Kubrick, Burton, and Avery. This is one of those rare occasions where character never actually mattered. It's a Tex Avery film. That's all you really need to know. It doesn't have to rely on some sort of selling point. Now, it's true Tex Avery did have several running characters, Droopy being his best, and of course that stripper character that was oddly enough turned into a children's plush toy. That is so uncomfortably hilarious. But most studios, they liked characters so they could market and promote. With Avery, the stars were the gags. These were mile-a-minute jokes, stuff that could fill up an entire feature film, and he shoves them all in a 6-minute short. Out of all the films on here, I'd recommend Who Killed Who. This is Avery's version of a whodunit, and it is hilarious. Though I can't deny Symphony and Slang is a visual masterpiece. Of course, The Cat Who Hated People is funny. Bad Luck Blackie is funny. You know what? They're all funny. Every single one on here is funny. I recommend every single one of them. If I give this tape any less than 4 stars, I think an anvil will fall on me, and rightfully so. This is a great tape, and this is a great director. Check these out. This is Waddle from Watchwaddle saying... So today we're going to talk about a relatively unknown cartoon series that I think should probably get more attention. This is The Ant and the Aardvark. When Warner Brothers Studio closed their doors, animator Friz Freleng and executive David DePatie left and formed their own group. Then they were hired by MGM to create some cartoons for theatrical shorts in the 1960s. Obviously, the animation wasn't as good, but they were creative and they were fun. These cartoons consisted of the Pink Panther, the Inspector, whom I'm pretty sure was supposed to be Inspector Clouseau, and the Ant and the Aardvark. The concept was simple. The Aardvark chases the ant. It's no different than a Coyote and Roadrunner cartoon. But while those cartoons had great backgrounds, perfect timing, and fantastic silent performances from the lead two characters, this cartoon had John Byner. He did the voice for both these two characters, imitating Dean Martin for the ant and a superb Jackie Mason for the Aardvark. This is this cartoon's selling point. I love this character. Jackie Mason is already a very funny comedian, but to hear this guy do a spot-on imitation of him is hilarious. I love this character so much, I'm probably one of the very few people that actually own merchandise of him. That was packaged with a Pink Panther tape that had none of their cartoons on, but whatever. This tape consists of 5 different cartoons, all of which are pretty good, but I personally recommend Technology Phooey. It's easily one of the funniest ones, and I love seeing obsolete technology. It just cracks me up. Do I have any complaint about this whatsoever? Just one. After watching too many of these, you might be speaking like Jackie Mason for about a week. I'm an anteater. Why am I called an anteater when I'm always addressed as Aardvark in the opening credits? Makes no sense. Doesn't make any sense to you. Doesn't make any sense to me. These cartoons may be dated, but they are really hilarious. I definitely recommend them. I give it 3 ducks. 3? Only 3? That's about 4. Why don't give him 4? Okay, I'll stop. Sorry. You knew we had to do a Betty Boop tape. This is animation's first diva. Created by the great Max Fleischer, voiced by the great Mae Questel, this is a character who dominated the 1930s and is still popular to this day. There is no one else like Betty Boop. The black and white cartoon style? What could I say? They're noirs in their own right. These are some of the best animated films of all time. The style, the look, the character, the direction, the music, everything about these are great. What else could I possibly say about a character that pretty much boops for herself? All of her official shorts were released in the definitive collection, but my personal favorite is Volume 2. Not only does it have a bunch of the pre-code era stuff, but it's actually got the jazzy guest stars. This is the one that includes ones with Louis Armstrong, Rudy Vallee, Ethel Merman, and my personal favorite, the ones done by the great Cab Calloway. You can't get much better than that. It gets the full 5 ducks. Find yourself a copy and boop-boopy-doop yourself a good time. When a lot of older cartoons entered the public domain, they ended up being picked up by corporations that put them on these videotapes that pretty much was just selling something to kids. They'd utilize the main character as a selling point and then just filled it up with a couple of other lesser-known ones. In this particular case, they utilized Daffy and his war effort, and that was Scrap Happy Daffy. This is one of his zaniest cartoons of the 1940s, and it really showcased how funny this character could be and how diverse he was to be able to be used in a situation that is encouraging scrap piles. Send in your scraps, send in your metals. We need it for our war efforts. We needed to build our tanks. We needed to build our planes. But, whoa, I think Hitler is quite upset about this. Yeah, it's one of those cartoons. Normally, Hitler in these older cartoons is portrayed as either really stupid or really crazy. In this case, it's both. Mel Blanc outdid himself with this imitation, and it's not even on screen for very long. The rest of the cartoon is basically what you'd expect. Insanity, patriotism, optimism, and just all about fun. It gets the full 5. It's Daffy. It's the war effort. It's hilarious. It's parody. And it's history. Yes, it gets the full 5. Before I say anything, let me just state, Mel Blanc is a voiceover legend. The man has given no less than 110%. Every voice he did was perfect. This man has done no wrong, and nobody can ever top him. So, am I a complete hypocrite that I actually think Jim Cummings did the Tasmanian Devil better? Let me explain. In 1991, Fox Kids Saturday Morning released Tasmania, a show that featured the Tasmanian Devil and his normal acting family, along with a slew of other characters that I've never heard of. So yeah, I was a bit skeptical, but I watched it. And as soon as I heard the theme song, I was automatically hooked. Let me just say, this is one of the best theme songs of all time, and this coming from somebody who had The Muppet Show playing in my wedding. The show that followed was also great. Everything from the writing to the characters was fantastic. And you know, it wasn't trying to copy Looney Tunes. This was really trying to be its own thing. Each character had its own personality and unique storyline, and they worked off each other well. You might recognize some of the voices in this from Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. And speaking of voices, let's just talk about it. Back in the 50s, Mel Blanc was given a picture of the Tasmanian Devil and gave it this big, brooding, slobbery voice, and it fit the 6-minute short. But this is not a 6-minute short. This is a weekly half-hour sitcom. Jim Cummings had to create more of a personality to this character that would keep us coming back every week to watch it. And he did. It was great. He did a fantastic job and deserves every credit for it. The tape here includes the first episode that was ever aired and the first one I ever saw, the Dog Turtle story. It also includes Here Kitty Kitty Part 1 and 2, which is a straight-up horror comedy, and a hilarious one at that. I totally recommend this tape, and I totally recommend this show, even if you're a newcomer. I give this show 4 ducks. Hunt it down and check it out. So this episode is a tad odd, because I actually have a question about streaming. Between 1942's Bambi and 1950's Cinderella, Disney released 6 features that were not straight movies per se, but rather a collection of shorts or featurettes. The one we're talking about today is Make Mine Music. This feature is a collection of 10 short films. Casey at the Bat, Peter and the Wolf, The Martins and the Coys, which is a take on the Hatfields and McCoys, The Blue Bayou, which was originally in Fantasia, All the Cats Join In, Without You, 2 Silhouettes, After You've Gone, this weird one with 2 hats that fall in love, and The Operatic Whale. The animation, of course, is top-notch, and the music is fantastic, everything from the Andrews Sisters to Benny Goodman. The only problem I actually have with this tape is it's not in its entirety. The Hatfields and McCoys scene, or rather the Martins and the Coys, are actually edited out of this project. Yeah, only contains 9. From what I understand, the reason is because they all used guns. You know, because there's no other Disney film that actually used guns. Okay. However, this movie was intact when they released it in Scandinavia. Okay. I guess I can't be too surprised. This was around the time period where Greedo shot first, FBI agents had walkie-talkies, and in fact, when Melody Times was released, Peso Bill's cigarette was removed. But that film actually had its intact release when they put it on Disney+. In fact, all the animated features are uncut on Disney+, but Make Mine Music isn't there. I guess they could have released it without that segment, again, like they did with the videotapes, but they probably want to release it intact. Well, I finally got around to seeing it, albeit bootlegged on YouTube, and I'll be honest with you, it's actually really funny. Well, whatever the excuse is, until this gets rectified, I'll at least still have it on videotape. It might not be the best production, but I'll be honest with you, what really puts us over the top is the Benny Goodman song. I love Benny Goodman, and All the Cats Join In makes it totally worth it, especially that cool artistic drawing style. Fun fact, I actually saw this cartoon for the first time with the Stray Cats song Rock This Town put in, back when they released it on DTV. DTV. That's a story for another time. In the meantime, until this situation gets rectified, I will continue watching it on videotape. Yeah, I know it's edited, but this is still good. I'm still giving it 3 ducks. This one's gonna be fun. I want my DTV. So back in the 80s, when cable was relatively new, a station was launched that was dedicated solely to music and music videos. This was MTV. I know it sounds odd to have a whole TV station actually play nothing but music, but believe you me, this was our reality. See what I did there? Yeah, comment if you got that reference. Anyway, while music television became a popular culture, Disney put their spin on it. This was DTV, and the concept was so simple, it was brilliant. Popular songs, old and new, to a mixture of all of their old cartoons. This was a match made in heaven. I'll always remember that opening. You see the familiar Mickey symbol, and then that synth music starts playing. Oh my god, it got you pumped. It got you ready. And the music, what could I say? It was awesome. You know, for some of us, this was our introduction to classic rock, not to mention previously unreleased animation. As I pointed out in my Make Mine Music review, this is how I was introduced to the Cats Join In scene, albeit with the Stray Cats song. But there was so much more. While some of them were basically just dance number scenes, they also had the entire Lonesome Ghost played with the Ray Parker Jr. Ghostbusters. That is awesome on so many levels. This one was actually shown on a Halloween special, DTV Monster Hits. It had all of their spooky songs played with all of their creepy cartoons. Perfect atmosphere. I make it a habit of watching that every October. Again, there was so much more though. This particular copy is one I have on a Betamax tape. It includes songs of Little Richard, Elvis Presley, The Supremes, The Four Tops, The Beach Boys, just to name a few. Oh, and in case you're wondering, a Betamax is an old VCR. Yeah, you know how streaming people make fun of DVD people? Well, DVD people used to make fun of VHS people, and VHS people used to make fun of, well, me, a beta person. Yeah, I still have a working beta. I can watch Han shooting Greedo all I want. Na-na-na-na-na-na. Okay, I'm sorry to get off topic. Anyway, if you're old, DTV is like a great nostalgic trip, and if you're young, it's a great look at some of the classics. Check it out. This is a great production, even if to watch just in the background during party gatherings. You know, when we're finally allowed to do that again. I know there's technically no new animation and no new music, it's all just classic, but you know what? It's still awesome. Check this tape out. It gets the full 5 ducks. It rocks. Today, we are looking at the Citizen Kane of Popeye cartoons. So the Popeyes weren't exactly my favorite of the old cartoon shorts. I do admire their style, their humor, and of course their familiarity. The plots are basic. Bully harasses girl, boy beats the ever-living crap out of bully, and boy gets girl. It's simple, a bit sexist, and violent as hell. You know, good old-fashioned 1930s family stuff. Okay, I know the cartoon shorts were more than just that, but that was their basic setup, and it worked. So in 1936, the Fleischers took this basic concept and basically made it bigger and better. Literally. Popeye the Sailor Man meets Sinbad the Sailor, and a year later, Popeye the Sailor Man meets Alibaba's 40 Thieves was a big deal when they premiered. Even the studio agreed and plugged these as feature films. Yeah, they were about 15 minutes long each, twice the length of the average cartoon of the time. That was 2 reels of film. Like I said, that was a big deal. Remember, the first one was a year before Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered. But there was more to it than just length. Again, much like Snow White, they needed to impress the audiences, get their attention. So the Fleischers decided to come up with a lot of different special techniques to make the cartoon more interesting. For example, these were in full color. That was a rarity for Popeye cartoons at the time. Even after they came out, they were still in black and white. Also, there was a lot of live-action backgrounds in the foreground and in the front. Characters would go all around this thing. That was pretty impressive for its time, even for nowadays. Also, the foreign setting allowed for more adventure rather than just 2 sailors beating each other up. The screen was filled with bright and interesting creatures and monsters. Fun fact, this film right here is what inspired Harryhausen to create what's arguably his greatest film, The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. Since these 2 fell into the public domain, their availability became a lot easier for distributors. But the best tape is the one right here. It's got both of them on it, uncut, back-to-back with nothing else. So watching this is like watching a full-length double feature of epic proportion. This gets 5 ducks. Check it out. Today, we are taking a look at cartoons that my cousins banned me from ever showing them ever again. Harness the power. This is Dino Riders! So let me take you back to a different time. This was the age when toys were at its most awesome. And none of this could be portrayed any better than in their commercials. These aren't commercials, they're epic filmmaking. They're in caves, there's smoke, there's slime, there's lasers going off, sound effects everywhere. It's action. Some of these toys even come with toys. This was more than playtime. This was an epic adventure. I know a lot of people think commercialism is nothing more than a sneaky way of selling stuff, and, well, yeah, that's true, but did I mention epic adventure? It seems obvious that the next step to this would be to turn these action films into, well, cartoons. Well, thanks to the Reagan administration making this legal, yes, that was a thing, I'll get into that some other time, the toy companies did it. Creators were coming up with more and more ideas, and we were buying them up. In 1988, Tyco came out with Dino Riders. These were spacemen riding dinosaurs with machinery and laser guns. Well, that's a no-brainer. Or should I say a brain box? Watch the show, you'll get it. An idea so simple needed a cartoon so simple. And we got two great adventures. So what happened was they sold toys, some of which came with an animated videotape that had commercials in them for the toys they were selling, which made us want to buy more toys, which made us want to watch more cartoons. Capitalism at its best, and we were running this cycle like hamsters in a wheel. But did I mention this wheel had laser guns? Awesome playtime aside, how does the cartoons hold up? Well, as I said, my cousins banned me from ever showing it to them ever again. You see, there are two types of people. There are the type that outgrow toys and cartoons, and there are the type that never stopped. Some people look back at the too simple premise, the cheap animation, and the obvious commercialism, and they're kind of tainted by the experience. And let's face it, after I ruined Thundercats and Master Universe for them, I believe their exact words were, "We used to watch this shit!" They refused to let me show them this again. By the way, you may have noticed I haven't exactly talked about the plot. Remember how I said that these were spacemen on dinosaurs with laser guns? Yeah, that's the plot. Is there anything stand out about it? Well, Frank Welker did the evil leader.
Because every 80s villain needed an epic voice.
A recommendation of these basically depends on you. If you're the type of person who looks back at blatant commercialism bitterly, then I'd stay away. But if you can laugh it off and enjoy the memories of playtime turning into an animated video, I'd say give it a watch. I give these 3 ducks out of 5.
Then I am going to steal a 4th duck.
Prepare to be dumbed down in this episode because we are looking at Beavis and Butthead. Viewers of this 90s liquid television animation tend to be split into 2 extremes. Devotedly loving or repulsively hating. Me? Well, I think it's best I tell my experience. In 1993, I was in a middle school field trip in a room with a bunch of idiots who put on MTV and introduced me to this crudely animated cartoon about 2 stoners doing dumb things and laughing. I, who was, even at this young age, becoming an animation enthusiast, looked at this and said, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life." I just assumed it would go away like a bad joke. But that summer, they were everywhere. Before memes were a thing, cartoon popularity sort of spread through shirts, stickers, dolls, and word of mouth. Everybody was talking about them and their, and I very loosely say this, short films. Frog Baseball, for example, and yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. They break stuff, they burn stuff, and very obviously under some kind of influence, they laugh about everything. I just didn't get it. And then, that September, I entered high school. And I totally got it. Their adolescence behavior, the destruction, the pyro antics. This was every kid I hung out with in school. Beavis and Butthead weren't representing Generation X, they were mocking it. This was a parody. Sure enough, I heard creator Mike Judd in several interviews discussing, in his numerous amounts of voices by the way, some of the influences that these characters were from. And yeah, you totally get it. You totally see how somebody can watch these individuals, pity them at first, roll your eyes at them, and then you start snickering and say, yeah, I'm gonna make a cartoon about this. I can personally say from experience that is exactly how I handled every single customer that ever walked up to me and asked me something really stupid. As their popularity grew, so did their controversy, and after an unfortunate incident that really warranted that waiver "don't try this at home," a lot of their antics began to get censored. They couldn't sniff glue, they couldn't burn things, they couldn't even say the words fire, one of their catchphrases. The funny thing is, this didn't slow them down. They kept going for several years and even had a full-length movie that's so good, I actually have to talk about it in its own episode. It is amazing how I went from despising these two to almost envying them. Their breaking things, including each other, all for a cheap laugh, is almost optimistic. It's not about the malice, they're just having fun. In the 90s, when Generation X stereotypes were pretty much all miserable, these two were laughing and enjoying life. So, yeah, I envy them. As far as their animation is concerned, I once heard a critic say it looked like doodles you would do in school. Yeah, I see that. And I think any animator or illustrator can kind of respect that. Seeing their evolution of animation over the years, or even the lack of it, actually became educational for me. It's funny to think that despite what it said in the opening, they kind of did become my role models. Recommendation of these are a little hard. Gene Siskel once said that he was actually taken by their adolescence, and that is exactly how you have to watch these. If you're looking for a good cheap laugh at the generation's expense, I would give these a try and see what you think. However, if you're more interested in their older controversial work, you have to find them on bootleg tapes, but be warned, these are most definitely not for everybody. I give these 4 ducks. Check your brain at the door and have yourself a little fun. Today, we are looking at what, for me personally, was my first animated serial show. This is Hoppity Hooper. When television was in its infancy, a new cartoon company, the J. Ward Production, began to release a series of animated shows, albeit on a shoestring budget. Their witty humor in the wake of the Cold War entertained children and adults alike. Their most popular one was Rocky and Bullwinkle, but today we are going to look at their lesser-known one. From 1964, this is The Adventures of Hoppity Hooper. Hoppity, a cute, lovable little frog, along with his Uncle Waldo, a fox, and a dim-witted bear named Fillmore, had all kinds of adventures in Froggy Bog, Wisconsin. This show, along with most of J. Ward Productions, followed an interesting format. We would open with our 3 friends doing something casual, like accidentally building an atomic-powered corkscrew the size of a house. Casual. Then they would accidentally turn it on, and it would go into the ground. As they do. We then go to another cartoon like Fractured Fairy Tale, which is a spoof on popular fables, or Colonel McBragg, which was an old guy talking about his past. We would then go back to the show and see the conclusion. The drill would go into the ground so deep that it hit water, then steam, and then a volcano. Because science. And then the show would end. Yeah, every other episode ended with a to be continued. We would have to wait an entire week to see what happened. How would our heroes survive this calamity? To a little kid, this was very exciting. I was biting my nails all week to see what would happen. The worst part about it is, if you missed that next episode, that was it. There was no streaming back then. You missed it. You'd have to wait 105 weeks for that repeat to come back on. This show is why I learned to use a timer on the VCR. All I had to do was put the TV on channel 3, the cable on channel 4, and make sure the tape had enough room in it. The VCR needed to be timed exactly perfect, and even with that, you had to have 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after, you had to have the screen off, the cable box on, and you had to make sure nobody touched any buttons. And even with all that, if that TV had a glitch and you missed it, that was it. For example, there was an episode where our heroes partook in a race. The guy betting against them, though, hired a hitman to kill them. I'm just realizing how weird that sounds. But anyway, the hitman planted bombs in front of their cars. I swear, this was a children's show. Anyway, I missed the next episode, and I was always wondering what happened. How did our heroes get out of that? Well, the next decade came and went, and then in 2000, my sister introduced me to this thing called eBay. I was a little hesitant at first, but then I saw these. And then after a $40 bid, which was marked down to $28 later, and then after waiting the usual 10 days for the check to clear, I got him in the mail. I was so excited. I was finally gonna see what happened. Turns out they just put the car in reverse and ran over the hitman. Oh, and remember that volcano? They just plugged it up with a giant cork. Okay, granted some of these conclusions were a little high in the fridge to survive an atom bomb, but that was part of their charm. It's also why I have sort of a soft spot for Indy 4. Regardless, these were a lot of fun, and I'll always have these thanks for answering the decade-long questions I've always wondered about. Now, if anybody can tell me how the cast of our house survived that earthquake, I can finally rest. Be as that may, this show was a lot of fun. I say check them out and give them a try. 4 ducks. So I have a quick one today, but this is one of my personal favorites from Disney. Their very first horror cartoon, The Skeleton Dance. In 1928, Mickey Mouse became a hit, but Walt Disney wanted to create other things that weren't relying on main characters. That is when composer Carl Stalling suggested to him a series of musical novelties. This became the Silly Symphonies. It's funny that later on he would end up working for Looney Tunes, and in fact Looney Tunes itself is actually a take on Silly Symphonies, but I digress. Stalling suggested animated skeletons to Walt. The result was a very impressive piece of animation and an extremely catchy score. This film tends to get overlooked by a lot of people, mostly because it's really nothing more than the title suggests. But if you're an animator or a horror enthusiast, you will like it. And speaking of horror, this short is available on Disney's cartoon classics Scary Tales, along with several other really creepy shorts, including Donald Duck having nightmarish visions, Mickey Mouse in a haunted house, and even Pluto going to hell. Jeez. Any one of these shorts could have been the opening cartoon to a horror movie. Disney actually made several horror movies. I'm surprised they never opened it with one of these. Be as that may, you can find them all in this collection here. I give this 5 ducks. Check it out and prepare to be scared. The 5 o'clock whistle's on the blink. The whistle won't blow, and why you think? You know, sometimes a cartoon short is so good it's worth getting the entire tape for. This is Little Red Riding Rabbit. One of the best things about the great Bugs Bunny is putting him in an already established setting and just letting him do his thing. In this case, however, he's not going up against some straightforward foil. That's funny enough, but in this case, it's not just one, not just 2, but 3 hilarious performances. In one corner, we got Bugs, who's always optimistic, handling every situation with quick wit, perfectly timed gags, and of course, performed flawlessly by the great Mel Blanc. And then we got the Wolf, played by Billy Bletcher, the same guy who played the Wolf in Disney's Three Little Pigs. So it's kind of like he's playing a parody of his own character, in a version that has Bugs, who arguably is the parody in this cartoon. It's like if Airplane was hijacked by Spaceballs. And if the two of them trying to outwit each other isn't funny enough, we have Red, who, and I'm just gonna say it, is funnier than both of them. This character is played by Bea Benaderet. Television enthusiasts probably know her best as George and Gracie's neighbor, but she is a veteran voiceover star in her own right, doing countless amounts of great performances from Betty Rubble to Granny. But this is truly her crowning performance. She plays Red as this 1940s Bobby Soxer, balancing really, really loud and annoying with blind innocence. It just makes the payoff all the more hilarious. The ending, I don't dare ruin it for you here, but let me just say, it's a must-see. This entire cartoon is a must-see. Extremely comic timing, superb directing, and 3 of the funniest performances from 3 of the funniest voiceover stars. What more can I possibly say about this? The rest of the cartoons on this tape are pretty good too, but I'll be perfectly honest, even if they weren't, this tape would still get 5 ducks. Heck, put this cartoon on the same tape as Ishtar and I'll give it 5 ducks. Check it out. It's a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. So in 1950, the first Peanuts comic strip was published in a newspaper, introducing the world to Charlie Brown. In 2015, the Peanuts movie premiered. Between those, there were specials, films, comics, filled with memorable characters and thought-provoking stories. Sad moments, educational moments, moments that made you think, moments that broke boundaries, moments that made an adult feel like a kid and a kid feel smart like a grown-up. They made us laugh. They were truly universal, and they are timeless gems. And then there was Flash Beagle. Okay, for the record, I love anything Snoopy, Charlie Brown, and all the Peanuts gang. Especially Peppermint Patty. She's such a pain, she cracks me up. But one magical thing about these comics or specials or movies is not just how they relate to your emotion, but how they relate to anyone's emotion. There's always going to be a generation that feels for Charlie Brown when he loses at a ball game or when he gets laughed at. Even if it's topical, it's still relatable. This special, on the other hand, is really nothing more than just being drenched in the 80s. The style, the Irene Cara look, the last days of disco, it's ridiculous. And I love it. Now, for one, I love the 80s. But I don't expect my niece to watch this without saying, what the heck were you guys thinking back then? And I would see where she'd be coming from. This special does stray from their timeless masterpieces. It normally takes themes like religion, youth, and commercialism, and instead goes disco dancing with it. But that's what makes it so brilliant. I shouldn't be surprised that a cartoon dog in an 80s film is flash dancing. That should be, ironically, the normal thing. But since these characters are so philosophical and their cartoons so analyzed, it makes it a little strange to see. I could take any Peanuts cartoons and have this huge metaphoric conversation with somebody about it. With this, it's just 80s and it's fun. But you know what? I think every series deserves one of these. They deserve to just have a little fun every once in a while and go flash dancing. If you love the 80s, this is definitely for you. If you love Peanuts, you're still gonna like this. I give this 3 ducks. My only issue with it, you will not get this song out of your head for at least a week. It's good. Today, we are gonna look at some work of voice legend Scatman Crothers. This guy is a major talent. Singer, movie star, TV appearances, and of course, cartoon voiceovers. He has done a lot, from Meadowlark Lemon and the animated Harlem Globetrotters, yes, that was a thing, and to Jazz from the Transformers. He's worked for Don Bluth, Ralph Bakshi, and even Disney, doing a cat version of himself named, get this, Scat Cat. That's awesome. But out of all of these great performances, the one that most people, myself included, always bring up is Hong Kong Phooey. This Hanna-Barbera produced cartoon starred Scatman as Penry Pooch. That's a great name, by the way. He works as a mild-mannered janitor for a police station, but unbeknownst to Sergeant Flint, becomes the crime-fighting Hong Kong Phooey. Yes, it's about as silly as it sounds, but what really makes it is Scatman. This guy is such a talent. Every part he's in, whether it be small or strange, he puts his all into it. Other voice talents on this show include Joey Ross, Don Mezek, and Richard Dawson? I actually didn't know that. Fancy that. The show is pretty much straightforward, goofy fun, and what really makes it is a lovable character. Hong Kong Phooey would also make a guest appearance on Laugh Olympics, which also featured several characters done by Mel Blanc. Mel Blanc was famous for doing Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny's catchphrase is, "What's up, Doc?" And Doc, as a result of Bugs Bunny's catchphrase, was the nickname of the kid played by Danny Lloyd in The Shining. And since Scatman Crothers was in The Shining as Dick Halloran, that clearly means Stanley Kubrick was using the secret identity of Hong Kong Phooey as a metaphor for Jack Halloran's character as the caretaker of... I'm just joking, I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Hong Kong Phooey had 16 episodes, and they're all pretty good. This specific tape here has 2.5 hours worth. 2.5. What a random number. I give this tape 3 ducks. Check it out for a good old 70s Hanna-Barbera time. If you ask most people what their favorite Mel Blanc character is, it's no easy task. Even numbering it down to just Looney Tunes, there's still so many to pick. From Bugs to Daffy to Tweety to Peppy to Sylvester, they're all fantastic. But if you ask me what his true crowning achievement is, it's Yosemite Sam. Why? Because he's one of a kind, and most of that is due to Mel's performance. Warner Brothers was riding high in the success of Bugs Bunny, putting their superstar in every possible genre. When it came time to Looney Tune up the westerns, they needed a good adversary. But this wasn't just an unsuspecting hunter or a goofy scientist. No, this was a no-nonsense, balls-to-the-wall, rough and tough, American gunslinging, west of the Rio Grande cowboy. And he ain't no mamby-pamby. He made an impact from his very first appearance. Everything he said was with his tough, ornery voice. Every situation was with a guns a-blazing. Also, being the loud, rootin'-tootin' polecat that he was, having him go up against Bugs was even funnier. Bugs' calm and collective behavior just made Sam angrier, which just made the action louder. You know, in most movies, when you get bad guys, the ones who really enjoy being bad guys, they can't go out at the end by just getting shot. No. They had to go out in a blaze of glory. Well, that describes his entire 6-minute shorts. They pull no punches. Bugs is equipped with TNT, bombs, cannons, and he is not afraid to use them. Between the firearms, the explosions, and Sam's reacting with a "Doh!" These were the loudest cartoons ever made. The humor between these two were so funny that it lasted beyond the westerns. In later films, Sam would be cast as a pirate, a Roman guard, a German flyer, a Confederate soldier, a redcoat, a knight, any character they can possibly come up from. But he was always still a cowboy. Seriously, he was a British redcoat and yet still a Western cowboy. How does that even work? And whatever he is, he's still wearing the eye mask. Even when he's pretending to be a love interest, he's still wearing the eye mask. Why? Because that's his character, and it works. He's so laughable and yet so encourageable. You want to laugh at his failures, but you still envy his attitude. The biggest problem the writers had with this guy is that he was always outstaging Bugs. Yes, Bugs was always getting the best of him, but Sam was getting the laughs. They'd actually have to write extra hard just to make Bugs funnier. He was also a huge challenge for Mel Blanc. Mel would constantly lose his voice and cough whenever he did Sam. And for a voiceover star to lose his voice, that's not a good thing. But honestly, it just showed how hardworking and talented he really was. No disrespect to any modern voiceover star, myself included, who have tried to do his voice, but nobody, and I mean nobody, did it like Mel. That's what I mean when I said he was truly one of a kind. This tape here has a bunch of good ones on it, but I'll be perfectly honest with you, if it's a classic Yosemite Sam, there is no bad ones. 5 ducks. Without a doubt. Today, we are talking about the film that made Ralph Bakshi. This is Fritz the Cat. Yeah, I'm really walking a tightrope on this one. This is Bakshi's first feature film, released in 1972, though it takes place in the 60s, as Bakshi himself says through spoken awkward narration in the opening, heavy times. This film, or experience, is considered best understood by those who actually experienced the era. I wasn't alive in the 1960s. My parents were, and they, after seeing this film, confirmed, yeah, it's pretty true. This film, however, did portray in a way I hadn't seen before. Okay, so here's a quick rundown. Fritz is the youth of his era, a hippie cat. His life adventures has him strolling through town on the prowl for what most teenagers of every generation is looking for, yet the 60s seem to always take the blame for it. He gets chased by authorities, mixed up in several cultures he thinks he understands more than he does, and basically learns nothing in the end. While comedic, both controversially and extremely controversially, this film does not stray from being really dark when it needs to. Through his adventures, Fritz gets involved and arguably responsible for a riot, multiple murders, and a terrorist attack. Yet, like I said, in the end, he learns no lesson. Is that supposed to be funny or metaphoric? Who knows, but it does make talking about the film more interesting. From an artistic point of view, it's probably Bakshi's worst looking film. Not a criticism, but you can clearly see the evolution in his animation, voice recording, and technical experimenting. However, since Fritz is based on an underground comic, you could say this represents it well. Speaking of, let's talk about the controversy. No, not that controversy. The creation. As I said, it was based on an underground comic. Creator R. Crumb was very reluctant to give his rights to the character to Bakshi to make a film. In the end, he was very disappointed in the final product. Crumb ended up killing off his own character in the comics just to get back at Bakshi. While the film itself did have a sequel without Bakshi's involvement, Bakshi would later make his apocalyptic movie Wizards and have several characters commenting on the death of Fritz, which was an off-screen character. Wow, kinda reminds me a lot of that South Park Family Guy feud. At any rate, in the end, I'm really glad I saw this movie. It introduced me to an impressive director who would go on to do much better work than this. As for Fritz itself, well, like I said, this film did not stray from going really, really dark, and to be honest, most people are going to be turned off by that. This is definitely not for all audiences. However, if you are of age and curious, I say give it a shot. I give this movie 3 ducks. It's a happy time and a heavy time. So we're going to pick a random one today, and which better way to do that is with the cartoon collection tapes. But which one? So as I've previously mentioned, these public domain tapes were mass-produced and relied heavily on a selling point. The selling point being the main character, and then a couple of extras. I do wonder if they knew what they were selling the kids, but hey, that's a story for another time. Anyway, amongst the many main promoted was the mascot of the Walter Lantz Company, Woody Woodpecker. Who can forget this guy's voice and laugh? Fun fact, that laugh was originated by, here's a shock for you, Mel Blanc. Wow, he worked for every single studio back then, didn't he? The good news about these tapes was that they were giving the VHS generation a look at some great characters' classic work. And since the distributors weren't bound by studio rules, they can mix it up any way they want, giving us a really huge variety. However, some studios were a little bit more careful of which one of their films fell into the public domain. So in the case of Woody, for example, every single one of these tapes always included the same cartoon, Pantry Panic. Yeah, if you grew up with these tapes, you were really familiar with this one, weren't you? The cartoon isn't bad, mind you, it's just a few things about it, like, first off, it's the earlier version of him. Cartoon evolution always astounded me. It's amazing seeing some of these characters' transitions. But Woody? Well, just look at it. The humor, though, is spot on, though it is odd seeing him more demented than in control, but that fits with the story. So here's the basic plot. He doesn't fly south for winter, he gets snowed in, he gets hungry, and he goes up against a hungry cat, and basically they try to eat each other. There's always little things about this film I remember. My personal favorite is how he's staring down death in the face in one scene. It's actually pretty intense. But the one thing I will never forget is the aftermath of him and the cat chasing the moose. Jeez, this is like Tobe Hooper level gruesome. Outside of this film's occasional nightmare fuel, though, I do really like it. It's typical fun of the era, colorful, and filled with a lot of fast-paced gags. Just don't run it in front of Saw. The rest of the cartoons on these tapes aren't that bad. With these things, like I said, it's always a selling point character with a bunch of extras, so the rest of the cartoons are pretty hit and miss, and to be perfectly honest, I don't really remember any of them really being that much of an impact. Oh my god, it's gritty Humpty Dumpty! Oh, that's gonna be a review in itself. So how does one turn a 3-sentence poem into a full 6-minute cartoon? Creative writing, inventive directing, and a scene that has been haunting my nightmares for the last 3 decades. In 1936, the Fleischers released Greedy Humpty Dumpty, a cartoon about the famous children's poem. It's funny to think that the poem never explicitly said it was about an egg, but apparently that's what we, of all generations, have thought for centuries. I have heard somewhere that it was originally supposed to be a canon, which I guess technically makes more sense, but whatever. So the idea of an egg as a character falling to his breaking point is basic and a bit morbid, but this cartoon goes so many steps further to extend its runtime. First off, the character. Not wanting to make him too sympathetic, they turn him into a greedy tyrant obsessed with gold. He wrongly assumes that the sun is a giant golden nugget, so he builds the wall in order to climb it to get to it. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I love this cartoon, despite the nightmares it's given me. It's an extremely creative writing process to be able to take a simple concept like this and give it depth. I mean, this is a barely paragraph-long story about an egg cracking, and they managed to add tyranny, greed, obsession, punishment, and tragic downfall. Literally. Speaking of, let's talk about the ending. I'd say spoiler alert, but we all know what happens, so yeah, he falls and breaks. The setup of building the wall taller and taller to something I know wasn't what he thought it was bad enough, but wow, they really prolonged this falling scene, and the ending is very explicit. And yes, I do know this is just joke, but damn, this is uncomfortable. Is this supposed to be a nursery rhyme turned Shakespearean tragedy, or just an animated snuff film? Either way, it's definitely an interesting film to talk about. I put this scene on my top 5 death scenes in old cartoons, coming in at number 1. That was about 8 years ago. I still agree with this list. As creative as it was, this cartoon was never really a main selling point, so it usually was one of those extras on the public domain tapes. Mine was on the same copy of Pantry Panic. They just needed to add Balloon Land, and this tape could have been the cartoon Faces of Death. Despite all that, I'm still giving this tape 4 ducks. It may have haunted me, but it also inspired me. And quite frankly, that earns it. Check it out. As I said before, it's definitely an interesting film to talk about. Okay, so you're a kid in the 1980s. Your favorite movie is Ghostbusters. It's funny, scary, clever, cartoonish, and awesome. So of course you get excited to find out that there's a cartoon. And not a bad rendition at that. The humor, the scares, the characters, it's all represented well. The only question you asked was, why is it called The Real Ghostbusters? Well, you'd soon find out as one day you turn on the TV and watch what the commercial said was coming up. Ghostbusters. And you see this. At first, your head gets bombarded with so many thoughts at once. Who are these guys? Why is there a gorilla? What's up with the music? What is going on? And then suddenly, you let out this fulfilling, oh, now I get it, the real one. Yeah, it's common knowledge now what came first, but at the time, this seemed like a ripoff of a classic. However, the theme was catchy, the ghosts were pretty fun, and there's a gorilla. I was a kid, that's a gorilla, that's awesome. Anyway, I kept watching, and then I kept watching every Saturday. I liked it. But I'm not going to say I wasn't curious about the whole thing. Okay, so if you don't know, this is what happened. In the 1970s, there was a very, very low-budget TV show starring the 2 guys from F Troop and a gorilla named Tracy as paranormal exterminators, which was about as ridiculous as it was intentionally supposed to be. And then in 1984, there was the blockbuster hit movie. Then in 1986, both of these got animated spin-offs. The real one took place right after the events of the movie. These guys, however, were actually the sons of the guys from the TV show, Kong and Spencer. Tracy was actually the same character. Spencer Tracy, I just got that, I think. I'll have to consult them over at the desk set about that. Regardless, this does seem like a competitive competition, but as a kid, this was just twice the amount of Ghostbusters. What did I care? And if you want to get technical, both of them are ripping off Lonesome Ghost, which at one point used the Ray Parker Jr. song in their DTV release, so they just went full circle. Wow, my head is about to explode. All seriousness, I do like being a little kid and not being bound to pick a side. I just watched anything. And honestly, finding out that these guys were doing what these guys were doing just meant, hey, maybe I can do it. And I did. I created my own Ghostbusters series, and I could technically have both of these two series to thank for that. I also respect the fact that despite it came first and was banking off the name, it was trying to at the very least be its own thing. If you could separate it from a great movie like this and just accept that this is just a fun cartoon with a universal idea of a bunch of guys chasing ghosts, then I say give this a try. As I said, the characters are good and the monsters are fun. What's not to like? Give it a shot. I'd give it 3 ducks, but I'm actually going to give it 4 because I really like that theme song. Check it out. You'll have a good time. So, let's talk about Goofy. Created in 1932, Goofy, or The Goof, became a staple of Disney characters, appearing alongside Mickey and Donald in multiple shorts, a few movie appearances, and even his own series that included the hilarious how-to cartoons. The character was so popular that in 1992, when Disney Afternoon was really big, they gave him his own TV series, Goof Troop, which he starred in with Pete, an idiot neighbor, and Max, his loving son. For as much as I love this character, I admit the series didn't really grab me. So when I found out they were making a Goof Troop movie, I passed on it. And I'm more into the real Disney cartoon movies like Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. Maybe I'll check it out when it goes to video. And I did. And wow, I was wrong. This movie is amazing. So the story revolves mostly around Max, who is no longer this young, happy-go-lucky kid. He's an awkward teen, embarrassed by his goofy dad, and more into girls and his own life. Goofy is a single parent, supportive, loving, but a bit naive. When Max pulls a stunt at school to get the attention of Roxanne, a girl he likes, he gets into some trouble and the principal calls his dad with the typical exaggerated complaints. He was dressed like a gang member. He's causing riots. And Goofy, an old-fashioned dad, believes it without question, so he takes him on a trip to Bond, interfering with Max's plan to go on a date. Okay, for the record, I know this sounds very tween soap opera-y, but to its credit, they do mix it with a lot of typical Goofy cartoon gags. For example, they run into Bigfoot in one scene. However, this comes before and after a relatively dramatic conversation. But what really makes this work, at least for me personally, isn't that I related to Max when I was younger and Goofy now that I'm older, but the opposite. As a kid, when I grew up, I loved Goofy cartoons. So, I felt for Goofy. I mean, I kind of understood where Max was coming from, but I thought he was a little mean. As an adult, yeah, I still see where Goofy's coming from, but now I'm really kind of relating to Max. You'd expect it to be the other way around, but the writing is really clever. It never bashes one side, nor makes the other one too harsh. This way, everyone can relate to everyone. Even the antagonists have more depth than usual. As a kid, when the principal was screaming and telling Goofy that his son's gonna end up in the electric chair, it was actually kind of funny. But as an adult, geez, what an SOB. Again, you'd expect it to be the other way around. Like I said, very clever writing. And also, let's talk about Pete. Being Disney's longest-running cartoon character, he was usually utilized as like a villain toon. Lately more silly than serious, but in this movie, they kind of imply that he's kind of borderline abusive to PJ, his son. It's never too blatant, but you can kind of see it. Again, very subtly, so's not to taint the character. The scene where Goofy and Pete are in the hot tub is honestly the best scene in this movie. I know that sounds odd, but the conversation about parenting and trust gets straight up serious. You almost forget you're watching a Goofy cartoon. It kind of shows how parents get just as much as peer pressures as the kids do. Again, it never goes too far with the seriousness without throwing in some good fun gags. Not to mention some great music. And, oh, let's talk about the music. The soundtrack of this film is not only one of Disney's best, but it has reached legend. From fan videos to people still to this day wearing Powerline concert t-shirts, it's amazing. I personally own this soundtrack. I love it. This movie, this goofy movie, is easily one of Disney's best. It's amazing. I could tell you from personal experience that if you don't watch this movie, you are truly, truly missing out. Even if you're not a huge Goofy fan, even if you're not a fan of Goof Troop, like I'm not, you're still going to get something out of this film. From a kid to an adult to a parent, you're going to love this movie. I give it 5 ducks, without a doubt. Oh, one more thing. Pauly Shore is in this movie. I like him, I admit it. So I'm sure this is a real shock to everyone, but I love Looney Tunes. The short subjects produced by Warner Brothers from 1930 to 1969, surpassing 1,000, were so funny, so creative, and so popular even to this day, giving us countless characters that went on even after the initial animation department closed their doors, appearing in specials, commercials, movies, and even appearing in the spin-off show Tiny Toon Adventures. As good as it was seeing the longevity of these beloved characters, I did feel that their appearances lacked the energy of the shorts from the Golden Age. I mean, no offense, but these were masterpieces, done by guys that were just as nuts as their creations. Also, they weren't bound to running plots or rating limitations. They just did what they wanted so long as it got a laugh. Everything was just right, from the voices to the directing to the art department, and I never thought we'd ever get that magic of the old days ever again. But in 1995, I saw an ad for Carrot Blanca, a new theatrical short, spoofing the Bogart movie and starring the Looney Tune cast. My mom is also a huge fan. She got me started in Looney Tunes. So when we saw this advertised, we've both decided we needed to see it. Oh, no, not on TV or renting the video with the film that it came with. No, we needed to see this theatrically. Besides, back in the day, it took like a year for it to go on video. So we went to the movies, paid full price to get in, I think it was like $5 back then, and then watched the 6-minute short. It was the funniest 6 minutes we ever shared at a movie theater. And then we left before the opening credits even started for the film. The theater wasn't packed, but it did have a decent amount of kids with their parents. All who were just silent during this. I think they got more of a kick out of hearing us laughing in the back rows. The plot? Well, it's Casablanca, just 6 minutes and with the Looney Tunes. But the gags were just as good as they were in the old days. And the characters couldn't have been better casted. Especially Pepe Le Pew as the Claude Rains character, Louie. That just wrote itself. Also, I'm really glad they got Penelope to play the Bergman character, not just making up a random female for the part. Also, teaming it up with Sylvester as Sloslow, that's funny by the way, just also worked beautifully. Also, credit to these voice actors. It's hard enough doing Mel Blanc's iconic creations, but Greg Bergman didn't just do Bugs, he did Bugs doing Bogart. And Bob Bergman didn't just do Tweety, he did Tweety doing Peter Lorre. Fun fact, this short was eventually released on the Casablanca DVD as an extra. Maybe now I'll actually sit through the movie. Oh, okay, to be fair, I actually did eventually see the movie that it came with, The Amazing Panda Adventure, and it's not bad. It's one of those 90s Be Nice to Animal films, which is great for children. But that is not what we went to see. We went to see this. We paid our ticket for this, and this was great. Director Douglas McCarthy proved that theatrical shorts can still be done with the same amount of humor and pacing as the old days. If you're a fan of the classic Looney Tunes, watching this should be mandatory. I'm giving this film 10 ducks. 5 ducks for me and 5 ducks for my mom. Check it out. Its title deserves to be displayed with all the originals. Things are going to get surreal today, folks, because we are looking at Pink Floyd's The Wall. This 1982 hybrid of live action and animation was based on the 1979 album of the same name, combining lyrics with imagery, actually predating the film. Roger Waters had a movie in mind while writing them. The film centers around Pink, a rock star, reflecting on his past and going deeper into insanity. Losing his dad to the war, being raised by an overbearing single mom, being humiliated in school by a teacher who reads his poems out loud, finding out his wife is cheating on him. It intermixes with a lot of creepy images, like imagining the school system as kids going into a meat grinder, or imagining his concert turning into a fascist rally. This is where Gerald Scarfe's animation comes in. For example, when it cuts to the war scene, we see an insane cartoon with creepy images. It's very metaphoric and symbolic. In another scene, Pink fantasizes himself as a dictator at a fascist rally, and the animation shows goose-stepping hammers, one of the more popular images from this film. My personal favorite segment from this is What Shall We Do Now?, which for some reason doesn't appear in the album. I believe it was a space issue. This segment is intensely animated, showing all of his traumatic experiences as bricks in a wall that he mentally makes for himself. It's disturbing, but wow, it's amazing. The back and forth of live action and animation flows really well. It is said by most animators, myself included, that animation can create anything that the mind can conceive. This film is a brilliant example at that. This is especially true in the final third, the trial. It just goes straight up animated with some disturbing and yet extremely inventive cartoons. The best way I can describe this is it's beautiful at being anything but beautiful. Scarfe would go on to be the art supervisor on Disney's Hercules. It's another good example of how he really has a distinct style. It's too bad he didn't do more films. Also, fun fact, Pink's agent is played by Bob Hopkins. It won't be the last time he's in a film with cartoon characters. As weird as the animation is, I don't think anybody can deny it does look beautiful and fits with the disturbing nature of the film. As for the music, which is obviously a big point, I have heard a lot of criticism on Pink Floyd's style. But it does help a movie that's dealing with insane imagery. Fantasia's animation was timeless because I had great classical music. Heavy metal rocked because I had a great soundtrack. Pink Floyd is Pink Floyd. You can't get it mixed up with anything else, and it really does make this film stand out. Considering the content, this film is clearly not for everyone. But if you're an animator, you will get a lot out of Scarfae's animation. I give this 4 ducks. Every animator should take note of this film, that there is nothing animation cannot do. So I'm going to pick a random one from the public domain collection. Today, it's Corny Concerto, a Clampett classic from 1943. First off, let me just say this is a great entry in the Looney Tunes log. Sorry, Merry Melodies. It's bright, funny, and musical. It's a parody on Disney's Fantasia, but much like Looney Tunes is a reference to silly symphonies, this film sort of become an icon of its own, probably because of its availability. Elmer Fudd as Deems Taylor introduces 2 cartoons, both with the music of Johann Strauss. That's just funny. The Vienna Woods is Porky Pig hunting Bugs Bunny. The Blue Danube is Daffy Duck, I think, as the Ugly Duckling. Yeah, there's actually been some debate on whether or not this is actually Daffy Duck, but if it is, it's probably the only cartoon that Daffy, Bugs, Porky, and Elmer were all in together. Go figure. Anyway, as you'd expect with a Clampett cartoon, the gags are fast, violent, borderline offensive, and hilarious. Truth, my only issue with this is I wish it was longer. This could have been the Warner Brothers Popeye meets Sinbad, but that's not exactly what the producers really cared about. I'll get more into that if I ever talk about What's Opera Doc. As far as this is concerned, it is 6 minutes of hilarity. As I've mentioned, it's public domain, so it appears on plenty of these tapes, but the one I'm going to pick are the Cartoons Are Fun one. Why? Because it highlights the real star here, Elmer Fudd. Voiced by the great Arthur Q. Bryant, when she originally created for the Fibber McGee and Molly radio show, will go down in cartoon history. Everyone knows him as the second banana sap to Bugs or Daffy, but this one, he truly has the funniest moments. His spoof on Deems Taylor's introduction to the Fantasia segments is Zucker brother Mel Brooks material. It's that good. It's so good to see him shining in his own bit where he's not just the random hunter. Every performance in this cartoon hits it out of the ballpark. It's great, it's musical, and who doesn't like a good soundtrack by Strauss? I'm sorry, that just doesn't get old. I give this tape and this cartoon 4 ducks. As I said, it's a Clampett classic. Check it out. It's a one-way ticket to midnight. Call it heavy metal. Okay, reviewing this tape is a bit odd because I really want to review the original release first. That being a bootleg. So, funny story. I'm in an AV room in school when a friend of mine who knows I love cartoons comes up to me and shows me this videotape. It was a scene with a robot, a girl, and 2 aliens, and they were doing stuff. Okay, look, at that point, I had already seen plenty of R-rated movies, but this was a cartoon. Remember, this is before I discovered Bakshi. Hearing Bart Simpson say, "Who the hell are you?" is the most shocking thing I heard. Either way, I needed a copy. But this wasn't available at a Blockbuster. He told me I had to go to this dollar video store, which sold more tapes behind the curtain than in front of, if you know what I mean. Okay, so here's a little history lesson for you millennials. Back in the day, a video store had the empty clamshell cover on the shelves. You would bring that cover up to the cashier, they'd give you a videotape. You see, that's how you were able to tell if the video was in stock. If the cover was not on the shelf, it wasn't available. Somebody was already renting it. Suddenly I'm hearing that Streisand song, The Way We Were. Anyway, here was the issue. This tape did not have a cover. There was no official release of it. It was a bootleg. So I had to ask this very unsettling manager behind a counter for it by name. After a very suspicious look, I assured him it's just a cartoon and I got the tape. That night, when everybody was asleep, I was ready with my copy, a blank tape, 2 players, and an AV wire. And what I saw was a cartoon with cursing, nudity, and violence. Whoa! The movie was actually an anthology with great music, making it a lot like Melody Times with a sci-fi fantasy edge. It opened with a car in outer space blasting Radar Rider. It was the perfect way to start this film. The following segments included Harry Canyon, which was set in the future of 2031, giving it sort of a Blade Runner feel. Then, a fantasy world story, reminding me a lot of He-Man or Fire and Ice. Captain Stern, which is a sci-fi space comedy. B-17, which is a World War II set horror film with zombies. So Beautiful and So Deadly, which is a straight-up adult silly spoof with aliens. And Tarna, which was a Star Wars-like action saga with a heroine that made me feel very weird. Yeah, I think she belonged in the centerfold of a magazine. Speaking of magazine, this is actually where the film came from, Heavy Metal Magazine. Yeah, some of these stories were actually based on comics from former issues. I had to seek out as many of these as I could. I especially loved the full version of Den by Richard Corbin. The magazine is fantastic, giving artists the opportunity to express themselves with barely any limitations. Much like the magazine, this film, though, was thrilling to me, giving me an insight on this forbidden world. And then, in 1996, it had an official VHS release. Yeah, turned out it was only forbidden because of music rights, legal stuff. The same reason The Muppet Show never got its last 2 seasons on DVD. Is it wrong that I was slightly disappointed about that? All seriousness, I was getting more mature at this time, and my interest in animation more serious. So, in reality, the timing couldn't have been better. And seeing this on an official tape that's remastered is a totally different experience. One that I will get into next time, so join us in part 2 for the actual copy review. Welcome back. This is part 2 of our heavy metal movie review, and this time we're talking about the official VHS release in 1996. As I previously mentioned, watching this copy is a totally different experience. And by that, I mean this is a masterpiece. Getting over the initial shock of all of its R-rated material, because believe you me, at this point I've seen way worse, I learned to appreciate more how fantastic the art and animation is. Each segment has its own style, from cartoony to rotoscope. It has different and very colorful characters, and each setting and surrounding is completely different from each other, giving you this grand experience of what really is an endless world of imagination. And the soundtrack isn't just one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, I own the record by the way, but also utilized really well. It's not just thrown in there, they fit seamlessly with the mood. Journey is playing during a love scene, Sabbath is playing during a battle sequence, and Don Felder's Take a Ride fits unusually well with a World War II air battle scene. Who'd have thought? And also, let's not forget about the score. Elmer Bernstein, known for The Magnificent Seven, To Kill a Mockingbird, Great Escape, Ghostbusters, does an amazing job here. I truly feel that this is his best work. Or Robot Monster, one of the two. It's also interesting to note all the great voice work in this. That's John Candy. That's Eugene Levy. And, oh my god, is that Harold Ramis? Egon Spangler is playing the alien? A remastered copy also helps you find a ton of Easter eggs. Like, that's Robbie the Robot selling hot dogs. And look at the marquee behind him, that's Jaws 7. So, 2031 has Jaws 7, but 2015 has Jaws 19? Well, maybe it was a special edition. But nothing could have prepared me for this one scene in the Tarna segment. While she's flying on that giant bird, the background moves for 48 seconds. The entire background moves. You know how hard that must have been in 1981? Clearly, I've reached that maturity where I went from staring at her to staring at the background. But seriously though, this is an impressive scene. I couldn't imagine doing this. But anyway, this is a great film. It went above and beyond its adult material. While clearly still not for everyone, it's nothing short of an A+ production. This movie gets 5 ducks easily. It is the perfect example of finding something for its dirty content, and after cleaning it realizing you've discovered a gem. Hello folks, and today we are looking at a Bugs Bunny collection from one of his many public domain tapes. For Warner Brothers' biggest superstar, it's amazing how many of his films fell out of their copyright hold. It's also interesting to note that for what started as luxuries in the 1970s ended up so mass-produced by the 90s that they ended up in dollar stores. But hey, that just meant introducing us to more classics, so let's look at some now. First up is Wackiki Wabbit, a Chuck Jones cartoon from 1943. Chuck Jones would be one of the most popular Warner Brother directors, creating classics like One Froggy Evening and What's Opera Doc. This is one of his earlier works with bugs, and it's a great one. The plot is two guys get stranded on a desert island, run across Bugs, and try to eat him. Not only is Bugs hilarious, but so are the antagonists. These two guys, performed by writers Michael Maltese and Ted Pierce, are great in their own right. It's a wonder they never brought these two back. They could have had their own Road To series. I guess Bugs Bunny could have been the Dorothy Lamour. Every gag in this cartoon works beautifully, right up to the final punchline. Next up is Case of the Missing Hair, another Chuck Jones classic. This one fits more with his familiar formula. Bugs not outwitting someone for survival, but straight up revenge. In this case, it's a magician that disrupts his home. Bugs invades his act and hilarity ensues. I can't help feeling like this formula is therapeutic, like we all wish we could do stuff like this. The third on here is Presto Changeo. This is an earlier version of Bugs from the late 30s. There's been kind of some debate on whether this is actually Bugs or not. I mean, he does resemble the rabbit from Porky's Hare Hunt, which did evolve into the rabbit we know, and he doesn't even speak in this, but the cartoon's not bad. Two dogs are hiding out in a magician's house where a rabbit comes out of a hat and starts tormenting them. The gags aren't laugh out loud, but they are pretty inventive. Chuck Jones does his usual great job with those. And finally, we have Porky Pig's Feet, which is not a Bugs Bunny cartoon, nor is it directed by Chuck Jones. Kinda messed up consistency there, guys. But I don't think consistency was really what the distributors were going for. At any rate, this is a Frank Tashlin classic starring Porky and Daffy. It's actually one of their best team-ups. I have talked about this before, and I will talk about their teaming up again in a future video, but for now, this is definitely a fun entry. And while it doesn't exactly have Bugs starring in it, it does have him in a cameo at the end. In a shot that I have previously mentioned is the only time Bugs, Daffy, and Porky all shared the same scene together. That is all in the same shot in the original theatrical shorts. Go figure. And it is also the perfect way to cap off this collection of our favorite Wascoey Wabbit. I give this collection 4 ducks. Check it out, it's a ton of fun. So, Roger Rabbit. It's a perfect movie, it gets 5 ducks, and if you haven't seen it, why are you watching this? There's really nothing more I can say about it. So, maybe I'll just tell my personal story. So it was the summer of 1988. I was by my grandmother's house with my cousins when my dad comes up to us all and says, "All right, everyone, get up, we're going to the movies." "What movie?" I asked. He said, "Who Framed Roger Rabbit?" And I said, "Wow, that sounds dumb. Do we have to?" Okay, before you start commenting, bear in mind, I have not seen any trailer for this. I didn't see an ad, a commercial, nothing. I had no idea who Roger Rabbit was. I didn't even know what the word framed meant. So, yeah, I went into this movie completely clueless. And I came out with my eyes wide open. So the movie starts, and a familiar iris comes up. Looks very Looney Tunes. And then, Roger and Baby Herman are on the screen. What followed was a cartoon. Very Tex Avery or Robert Clampett. Stuff I was very familiar with. Okay, this is funny. Lots of gags, lots of violence, all that good stuff. All right, it's got my attention. And then, cut. A human walks onto the set. What the heck is going on? Okay, I have seen this stuff done before, but I really wasn't expecting it right here. So, we continue our story in the live-action world, and we get introduced to Eddie Valiant, played by the late, great Bob Hopkins. He and cartoon producer R.K. Maroon discuss animation, the title character, all treating them like they're actors. This is really clever. It's grabbing my attention. There's no cartoons, yet they're discussing cartoons. I really want to know what's going on. And then all of a sudden, wham! Dumbo. Wait, Dumbo? Dumbo? The Dumbo? Dumbo's in this movie? What follows is a scene with all the characters from Fantasia, interacting with humans. This is amazing. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The Ink and Paint Club. Daffy and Donald. 2 of my icons together. What could be next? Well, Betty. Yeah, Betty Boop, in black and white no less. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The scene is extremely powerful, not just because she's in black and white and even comments on it, but because it shows that this character Eddie, who has been built up as somebody who hates cartoons, still has affection for her. It's a nice, tender moment. We then meet Roger's wife, and she is making me feel a whole different kind of weird. We also meet Judge Doom, the obvious antagonist of the film, played by the great Christopher Lloyd. I honestly feel that this is his best part. Okay, I honestly feel that this is his second best part. After of which, we get some insight on Roger, and then learn some backstory, a very, very tragic backstory on Eddie. This movie is so clever at getting me invested in these characters. They handled the death of Eddie's brother and Toontown owners Marvin Acme with safes and pianos dropped on them, something so cartoony and ridiculous, with such seriousness. It really, really pulls you in and makes you think this is tragedy, not comedy. This is also true of the entrance of Toontown. Toontown keeps getting built up throughout this movie, the home where all the cartoon characters live. You would really want to see the inside of this, but at this point, we've already found out about a lot of murderous history that happens in this place. Knowing all of this and seeing the tense look on Eddie's face at the mere entrance of Toontown is almost like a ride at Action Park. You know it's not safe, but you still really want to do it. Eddie cautiously rides in. That music, that brilliant Alan Silvestri music just keeps playing and pumping your heart. It's building up like a tightrope. You don't know what's going to happen. I didn't know whether to feel joyous or feel scared. And then the curtains open and smile, darn you, smile. Whoa, we are inside the cartoon. I can't begin to describe the feeling I had as a kid watching this. It was just amazing. And it just kept shocking me. I see Droopy Dog over there. I see Tweety Bird over there. And then they still managed to shock me even more. Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse. Two of the biggest titans sharing the screen together. Impossibility has left the theater. We finally do exit Toontown. Honestly, we weren't in Toontown for that long. It just left such a huge impact it felt longer. But leaving was necessary because I would have OD'd on the cartoon. Doom reveals himself as the bad guy in one of the most tense and then scariest moments I've ever seen from a cartoon. Bob Hopkins confronts his brother's killer, defeats him, and the movie gets wrapped up, leaving us on this amazing shot. Actually, two amazing shots. One, all these cartoons together. But honestly, I've gotten so invested in these characters, I found the second scene more amazing. Eddie and his girl Dolores walking with Roger and Jessica into Toontown together. His fear, his hatred, finally gone. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The emotions on this scene was just, oh my god, it's Porky Pig! Wow, they shocked me to the very end. Seeing this movie in my youth was a one-in-a-lifetime experience, and I was lucky enough to not stay home because I didn't want to see it. I couldn't believe that. The creators of this movie did two things. One, they gave us a good story and a good movie with good characters, something movies are supposed to do. But they also gave us a great, beautiful tribute to cartoon characters that they clearly had love and affection for. They blended these two seamlessly. It kept you going, it kept you watching, you just loved every minute of it. And it was one of my greatest experiences watching this blindly on the widescreen. I could put this movie on to this day and still be in awe. It's amazing. Every time I always bring up crossovers that should have happened and everybody always tells me, it'll never happen, it can't happen, it won't happen. This is the movie I always bring up because this is an impossible film. This film can't happen. This film would never happen. But this film happened. This was a beautiful experience and one that I will never forget. One that told me anything could happen. If you haven't seen this film, check this film out. It's amazing. So, the first movie I ever saw in the theaters was Fantasia, for one of his many re-releases. I was only 3 at the time, but I could still recall images of dinosaurs and Mickey Mouse in my memory. I feel it's no coincidence that my love for cartoons, animation, and classical music all date back to this very event. About a decade later, this movie would finally get a video release, which by coincidence happened to be the first pre-recorded VHS tape I ever owned. I honestly don't think there's enough praise in the world I can possibly give this film. Actually, I'd barely call this a film. It's more like an experience. Like going to a museum and seeing priceless pieces of art come to life, with great classical music in the background. Fantasia is made up of 7 segments, the first being abstract imagery, animated to the great Sebastian Bach. The second is changing of all the seasons to Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite. Next is The Sorcerer's Apprentice, starring Mickey Mouse. Then it's evolution from Earth's creation to the dinosaurs, with Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Then we got Greek mythology played to Beethoven, a hilarious ballet with hippos and alligators to the Dance of the Hours, and finally, straight up scary images of ghosts, goblins, and the devil Chernabog to the Night on Bald Mountain, ending it with Ave Maria. It is 7 beautiful pieces of work all strung together. It's so impressive how they were able to cover all of these beliefs of creation, from Mother Nature to magic and sorcery to science and evolution to Greek mythology to religion. It's also got this fun little intermission where they actually animate the soundtrack. It's very cute. Every one of these scenes is the best in color, timing, design. It is truly a perfect work of art. I'd say the only issue I have with this tape is, to save room, they took out all of Deems Taylor's intros. Aw, now how are people gonna know who Elmer Fudd is imitating? Oh well, they did restore it when they brought it to DVD, along with a great documentary. But I will always treasure this tape here for being my first of many, many cartoons on VHS. And still, one of the greatest. And I'd say it's the perfect way to close out this month's of Waddle's VCR. And if you'd like to see more, please let me know in the comments, because I have plenty more to do. Until then, this is Waddle from Watchwaddle. Thanks for watching. I think one of the best things about cartoons is that we can spoof anything and yet somehow still come out so original. Case in point, Boston Quacky. Now, full disclosure, I've never actually seen Boston Blackie, so perhaps there's a joke or a reference that I'm missing. However, it doesn't seem to interfere with this cartoon's great performances and usages of gags. So, it's a spy spoof, I know that much. Feels very Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Get Smart. Daffy Duck stars as Agent Quacky. Porky Pig is his boss, Inspector Faraway. There's also his love interest, Mary, performed by the legendary June Foray. Yeah, you put Mel and June in a cartoon and you cannot go wrong. So the story is, Quacky and Mary are on vacation in Paris when Inspector Faraway... I'm just gonna call him Porky and Daffy. So Porky finds Daffy and assigns him to deliver a package. However, enemy agent, a man in a green hat, steals it, so Daffy follows him onto a train to get it back. The rest of the cartoon is gags on a train. Daffy and Green Hat, as they call him, try to outwit each other. It definitely fits with that Cold War era spy series, and the jokes all work well. Of all, though, the funniest scene is when the guy is underneath the table and tries to poison Daffy. Daffy, in mid-sentence, without any hesitation, pulls out a gun and shoots him. It's cold-blooded, but it is funny. It's something you'd see Sean Connery do, and it's good to see Daffy get his Bond moment. It all leads up to a very funny conclusion. I won't spoil it here, but it's definitely an eye-roller moment. This cartoon got a lot of airtime when Looney Tunes was on Nickelodeon, but it was very hard to find on video. I guess it was never one of Daffy's fan favorites. It wasn't even on the Golden Age DVDs. But I finally found it on the Stars of Space Jam VHSs. These came out after the movie hit, and they included less than popular ones. Thank God, because I love Boston Quacky. Most of these are done by Robert McKinson, who's a lot more subtle with his gags than like Clampett or Tex Avery, but he's really good in his own way. The one of his that most people remember is Stupor Duck, which is also a really good one. For me, this tape is totally worth it though for Boston Quacky. It actually makes me want to seek out the show, in the same way the Unmentionables made me want to watch the Untouchables. It's a great Daffy, and it gives this tape the 4 ducks. Check it out. In 1991, Nickelodeon premiered their new show, Rugrats, which centered around 5 toddlers: Tommy, Chucky, Phil, Lil, and Angelica. Their many adventures were imaginative, making this a lot like Ralph Phillips or the Muppet Babies. Their parents, whom were usually too oblivious to notice their kids escape the playpen, had their own little storylines going on. The show's not bad, the characters are innocent and likable, and both the humor and heartwarming moments are well written. It's entertaining enough for kids and the adults watching it with them. But the one thing that totally makes this show, at least for me, is the character of Angelica. Whenever this character is on, I tend to laugh. She is the oldest of the toddlers, making her the only character that can communicate with both the parents and the kids. They actually comment on this once, as in an episode where they all threaten to tell on each other about something, she points out that she's the only one that can talk to the grown-ups. I love meta humor like that. She was usually portrayed as the bratty kid or the antagonist of group, but as the show progresses, so did the character. The antics seem to turn more legitimate curious rather than malice. I usually hate it when a character changes due to reaction or complaints, but this always seemed more natural than forced, as kids do seem to be troublesome but usually mean well. In a way, she kind of reminds me a lot of Paris Geller from Gilmore Girls, especially how she went through that first starting off as enemy and ending up being an ally. It actually kind of looks like her too, I'm actually just noticing that. I'm surprised nobody's made a fan theory that this is the same person. At any rate, this tape here contains 5 of Angelica's best shorts. I personally recommend Word of the Day. In this episode, Angelica has a chance to be a helper on her favorite kids show, Miss Carol, but when the cameras aren't rolling, we find out that Miss Carol is not so kid-friendly, neither is her language. Angelica innocently picks up on these words, and it's her parents' nightmare. Seeing this kids show getting away with cursing by having something loud go by every time the word is about to be said left me in stitches. And it really did show how the writers really did aim some stuff at the adults. As I said, this show is innocent enough for kids, but this tape here is highly recommendable for everyone, especially parents. I give it 4 ducks. Check it out, it'll make you feel like a Rugrat again. In 1997, channel Comedy Central premiered their new show, South Park. It was based on 2 Christmas specials that creator Trey Parker and Matt Stone made with stop-motion animation and paper cutouts. One of them was actually one of the very first viral videos. It contained adult humor, foul language, inappropriate behavior, and was funny as hell. Despite being on television, the series pushed the envelope as far as they could, and was the first cartoon series to receive a TVM rating. This show about 4 foul-mouthed boys from South Park, Colorado became a phenomenon. I remember when it first came out, it was everywhere, and people were talking about it, quoting the lines, having fun with it. The show mixed a lot of social satire with their cartoony slapstick and adult humor. And after a while, the writing became way more intelligent than a lot of people to this day still give it credit for. This tape here contains one of their most popular episodes from Season 1, and one of their more infamous episodes from Season 2. In the first one, character Eric Cartman asks his single mom who his father is. She confesses her relationship with mostly everyone in town one night, and through plenty of spoofs and gags, we close on the mystery of who is Eric Cartman's father. Find out in only 4 weeks. Like I said, everyone was talking about it, and everyone was asking who was Cartman's dad. But when the time finally came on April 1st, the second part was not shown. It was replaced with an irrelevant special starring the cartoon within the cartoon, Terrence and Phillip. Yeah, turns out it was an April Fool's joke, and I admit, I didn't see it coming. And apparently, neither did a lot of other people. Comedy Central received over 2,000 complaint emails. Looking back, this is pretty stinking funny. But at the time, everyone demanded a part 2. And on April 22nd, we got it. So, spoiler alert, Eric Cartman's mom is his dad. Yeah, she's a hermaphrodite. I can't explain more than that. Yeah, it's dumb, but it does fit with the show's humor. As of now, South Park is on its 24th year on television, and is still creating satire with present social events. And despite it being very adult and inappropriate at times, it is very funny. Admittedly, I really do love a show where I could use a lot of metaphoric comparisons of real-life situations and say, do you remember that South Park episode that did this? And say, yeah, kind of similar. I'm gonna give this tape 4 ducks. 3 for its humor, but the extra duck is for its notoriety. If you're of age, I say check it out. Picking your favorite Bakshi film is extremely difficult, mostly because all of them are so unique from one another. Despite that, the one that always stood out to me was American Pop, which is a fascinating film. It's done mostly in rotoscope, though occasionally goes to still images, live action, and really weird effects, depending on the mood and timing of the scene. It also has a fantastic soundtrack that really drives the stories through its multiple time periods. The plot centers around 5 generations through 8 decades. We start with a family in Russia in the 1890s during a Tsar attack. The father is killed and his wife and son escape to America. When there, the son Zalmy grows up in the burlesque show business, surrounded by singers and performers, but ends up getting involved in the mob. His son Benny grows up wanting to be a jazz performer, but then enlists in World War II. His son Tony grows up sneaking into beatnik clubs, hitchhikes to California, and ends up being a songwriter for a hippie rock band. And finally, his son Pete falls into the dealing business for a punk band, but ends up being their lead singer. Okay, that was just a quick synopsis, but each one of these stories, characters, and settings are extremely powerful and emotion-driven. Also, the involvement of the soundtrack per each era really affects the lives of all of them, as they all yearn for their own personal love for music. This is uniquely and beautifully shown through animation. There's way too many good scenes to mention in this brief review, but some of them that really stand out to me was the Benny Goodman Sing 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 number, that went from jazz performances to World War II battle scenes. Also, the famous Jefferson Airplane song Somebody to Love plays during a rock concert while the music and animation starts to get warped as a character drinks punch that contains a little bit more than just water, sugar, and red dye number 2. Also, its usages of Pat Benatar's Hell is for Children and the Sex Pistols' Pretty Vacant playing during the punk scene, it looks just like something out of an 80s music video. Everything from the vaudeville to the 50s rock and roll scenes is so well done, but the one that is probably the most powerful and surreal scene is a complete rotoscoped recreation of the great Jimi Hendrix performing Purple Haze. This Bakshi vehicle contains a lot less adult material than its X-rated predecessors, but still does not hold back from its dark elements, like the death, war, drugs, and behind closed doors relationships. But all of these are important to the plot, and not just thrown in there to be shocking or controversial. A warning for this film's content is warranted, but not for its adult material, for its emotional effects. It can be extremely depressing at times, but some of the best stories are. And this is 4 of the best stories. This film is a must for anyone who loves Bakshi, anyone who loves music, and anyone who loves surreal animation. It gets 5 ducks. I definitely recommend you check it out. Out of all the gems that the great Tex Avery has given us in his long career in cartoons, the one he will always be remembered for is Red Hot Riding Hood. And I think it's safe to say it's kind of obvious why. But this cartoon is much more than just, well, this. This cartoon is clever right from the beginning. We start with a typical story of Little Red Riding Hood, when suddenly the characters break the fourth wall and say they are tired of the same old thing. And so, to quote Jerry Colonna, something new has been added. What followed is straight up Tex Avery. The speed, the gags, the wild takes, and the extremely inappropriate sexual innuendos. Even if you haven't seen this cartoon, you're probably familiar with it. Red has inspired so many different characters, including Jessica Rabbit. The Wolf inspired several characters like Jim Carrey from The Mask. In fact, he's actually watching this cartoon in one scene. Plus, it was so popular that Avery himself would do this same setup several other times, including with Cinderella, Little Ava from Uncle Tom's Cabin, and many more. He even had one where he brought in Goofy, Pinto Colvig, to voice one of the wolves. Speaking of popularity, this film was a major hit when it came out in theaters in 1943. Apparently there was a showing of it in an Isling, New Jersey theater back then. It got such a reaction that all the patrons demanded it get played again. Seriously. And then after that, the movie theater owner actually offered a 3rd run for anyone who wanted to stay after the actual scheduled feature. 150 people stayed and watched it. Wow. I mean, I was impressed when I heard that President Reagan asked the projectionist to rewind that scene in Back to the Future. But 150 people for a cartoon? Only good old New Jersey. This film was also popular with the armed forces. When visiting MGM for some propaganda films made for them, they were given an uncut version of this film to show the troops. Even to this day, this is a very funny and memorable cartoon, and it was voted number 7 in the 50 greatest cartoons of all time by Jerry Beck. And yes, I do know there's a lot of sexism exploited in old films, but I have heard quite a lot of defense for this film by feminist groups that point out it's the shoe on the other foot story with the wolf and the grandma. Incidentally, that's Dawes Butler who does the famous howl of the wolf. And that's voice actress Sarah Berner doing the voice of Red. Though mostly uncredited, she has done a ton of voices in cartoons, usually either a sexy vixen or a childlike innocent. Yes, Red and Chilly Willy are the same person. I bet that makes lots of yous uncomfortable, doesn't it? Regardless, this film and its history is an impressive one, and one that, from what I understand, Avery was very proud of. It appears on this tape along with several of his other MGM classics, and as I've said in the past, you can't go wrong with a good Tex Avery. I definitely recommend you watch this tape, but if you're from New Jersey, I say watch the cartoon, then watch the rest of the tape, and then rewind it and watch that first cartoon again. We gotta keep this tradition going. Amateur Night is actually one of the best and most inspirational cartoons. Not because of how funny it is, but because of how unfunny it's allowed to be. The plot is simple and yet genius. Yes, this production is filled with contradictions. So it's Amateur Night, and that's your setup. What follows is a series of performances. If it bombs, which all of them do, it's supposed to be. That's what makes the gag. The less funny it is, the more funny it is. That doesn't even sound grammatically correct, but it is. The formula works so well because the joke falling flat is in itself the joke. It brings to mind things like Fozzie Bear being a failed comedian, or even nowadays coining the phrase dad jokes. You don't expect a laugh, you expect an eye roll. Oh, and speaking of falling flat, guess how the judge dismisses the bad performances? With a trapdoor. Okay, I've seen the old trapdoor bit in hundreds of cartoons from back in the day. It ranges from funny to exaggeratingly funny. But I do wonder, was that real? I mean, so many different studios use this bit, it kinda makes me curious. Did the performers know? Did they have to stand on this little box and accept falling to what sounds like an overly comical, painful drop? Suddenly I feel like the people on The Gong Show got off easily. At any rate, besides the hilariously unfunny performances, this Tex Avery directed Looney Tune, man I love this guy's work, also had 2 running gags. One is a hippo in the audience with this really annoying laugh provided by Avery himself, and the other, Egghead, trying to get into the act. This leads to the punchline. I won't ruin it for you here, but it perfectly tops off this eye-rolling gem. I give this cartoon 4 ducks. I would give it 5, but I don't want any of yous to quack up. You know, sometimes an idea is so obvious it's criminal. Or should I say, gangsters. Racketeer Rabbit. Bugs Bunny versus mobsters. The gags just come. So in the 1930s and 40s, gangster films and noirs were very popular. It only seemed fit that Warner Brothers would put their biggest star, Bugs Bunny, who's already gone up against hunters and cowboys, up against the mob next. It's a normal evening for the rabbit, who slumbers away into an abandoned house, unknown to him that it's actually the hideout of gangsters. Enter Rocky and Hugo, brilliant caricatures of Edward G. Robinson and Peter Lorre. What follows is quick wit and quick gags. It's a match made in heaven. It's no wonder we thought that Bugs Bunny was named after Bugsy Siegel for so long. Actually, that's not true. Turns out he's named after Ben Bugs Hardaway, the guy who wrote his first cartoon. But I believed that story for so long. The attitude, the wise guy, it just fits perfectly. Every gag in this cartoon gets a laugh, as does the dialogue. From the, well, we'll make it talk, to the, it's curtains for you, Rocky, curtains. Curtains, get it? That's adorable. Above all, the most morbid joke in this cartoon is when Rocky tells Hugo to take this mug for a ride, and he does, but only Bugs comes back, saying he ain't gonna bother us no more. Okay, so what happened to Hugo? He's not in the rest of the cartoon. Geez, I thought Daffy shooting the guy under the table was bad. This is hilariously messed up. I love it. The mobster cartoons only got funnier and funnier as they continued, and they ended up giving us the more famous Rocky along with his dopey sidekick Muggsy. These two should have had their own spin-off, or a television special. You could have teamed them up with Goodfeathers. That totally would work. Why don't they do that? Warner Brothers, please greenlight this. Be as that may, I will always love this original one here. Much like I said about Little Red Riding Rabbit, I got this tape solely for this cartoon, but the rest of them on here are really good too. I give this 4 ducks. Check it out. Prepare to go back to childhood, because today we are looking at Winnie the Pooh. In the 1960s, Walt Disney acquired the rights to the beloved characters of the 100-Acre Woods. A few decades later, and it was a franchise, one that defined both childhood innocence and imagination, and still youthful and full of wonder to this very day. I can't really think of anything else that comes even close to matching it. Some stuff you watch from childhood to adulthood and then say later on it was either more kiddyish than you remember or way more adult than you remember. This is the perfect balance, capturing childhood innocence, yet it never feels like it's talking down to you. With a franchise and filmography this huge, it does make it difficult to figure where to start from, so I'm just going to start at the beginning. Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, which came out in 1966. Everything starts in a childhood bedroom. The narrator introduces it belonging to a boy named Christopher Robin. And then, through the most relaxing and catchy theme song ever, we are introduced to him and all of his stuffed animals as imaginary cartoon characters. There's the gloomy Eeyore, Kanga and Little Roo, Rabbit, Piglet, and there's Owl, but most of all, Winnie the Pooh. The story begins, and we follow Pooh as he starts his day, looking for honey. At first, he tries to disguise himself as a rain cloud, to get past the bees, of course, and go get some from a honey tree. After that doesn't work, he decides to just get some from his friend Rabbit's house. He ends up eating too much and getting stuck in Rabbit's hole. This is where the rest of the cartoon takes place, as they all try to get him out. The premise is simple, and yet made extremely entertaining through fun characters, cartoony slapstick, which is way more than I remember, and also through the narrator, Sebastian Cabot. His narration is truly one of the best parts of these cartoons. He doesn't read it like he's just rummaging through a kid's story. He treats it with such dignity and respect. It's like he's reading a book on Masterpiece Theater. Speaking of, I love how this cartoon acknowledges that they're in a book. Pooh doesn't just go to the next story, he literally jumps from one page to the other. He even addresses the narrator. It's so clever and so funny. Another thing I really like about this special is the addition of Gopher. He wasn't in the original story, but they put him in this cartoon. Actually, they originally wanted him to replace Piglet. His running gag is that while he's coming to help, he's not in the book. Get it? He's not in the book, but he's also not in the book. I love meta humor like that. If I may, I also want to mention something very personal. There's a scene where Pooh gets stuck and Rabbit decorates his back end as a moose trophy. When me and my little sister were small, I used to bury her feet in the sand and say that her legs were the antlers to a moose head I was creating. She'd rip her feet out and I would jokingly go, "Caitlin, you ruined my moose!" She'd laugh, I'd laugh, and then we'd do it about 100 more times. Every time I see this scene, I think of that. I would later find out that this was actually one of Walt Disney's favorite scenes. Yeah, I agree. Anyway, this is a great special. I own it on beta and VHS, and it's the perfect one to start off the Winnie the Pooh series. I give this 5 ducks. Check it out. Kids will love it, and the adults will feel like kids again. So after the success of Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, Disney followed it up with Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day. This one had a few things in it that were absent from the first, including more characters. Yeah, I never noticed this, but both Piglet and Tigger weren't in the first story. Piglet was mentioned in the opening credits, and there was a Tigger doll, but neither of them were animated. I believe it was because the story was centered mostly around Pooh, with the other characters just offering help. This special, however, gives all the characters their own scenes. Pooh is still the main character, but the rest of them have their moments. So, as you'd expect by the title, it's a very blustery day in the 100-Acre Woods. While Pooh is treating it like a holiday, wishing everyone a happy Wednesday, Piglet is having trouble with the wind blowing him around like a kite. Also, Owl's treehouse gets destroyed, so gloomy old Eeyore enlists himself to find Owl a new house. By the way, I love these two characters. Owl is this know-it-all that never shuts up, and Eeyore is single-handedly the most pessimist cartoon character ever. Although, give him credit, he does seem pretty satisfied on how he acts. These two characters are way more appreciated by adults than they ever would be for kids. Anyway, night falls over the woods, and we are introduced for the first time to the fan favorite, Tigger. In his brief intro, we hear his theme songs, all of his catchphrases. It's great. I mean, who doesn't love this guy? Yeah, we'll get to that next time. Anyway, after that, we get a great sequence. Pooh has this nightmare about these honey-stealing heffalumps and woozles. It is a trippy scene. I love it. Anyway, the next morning there's a flood, so all the characters have to flock to Christopher Robin's house. It's an adventure to get there, and everything turns out nice at the end, except for one thing. I've always wondered about this, even as a kid. As I mentioned, Owl's house got destroyed, so Eeyore went to find him a new one, and he does. Piglet's house. Piglet just let it happen, just let him take his house. I mean, he moved in with Pooh, so everything is okay, but why does this happen? I guess it's all about helping out a friend, but there's a sign on Piglet's house that says trespassing, and Piglet just assumes it's a family's name. I guess there's sort of a joke there, but am I reading too much into that? Sorry, I always just found that scene kind of odd. But oh well, it's not nearly enough to ruin a great special like this. This is a perfect follow-up. While the first one had introductions and light-warming characters, this one had adventure and fun. You might say it's a lot like Terminator 2 or Aliens. Yeah, that's right, I said it and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, this is a great special and I totally recommend it. It gets the full 5 ducks. Watch it and have yourself a happy Wednesday. So now we come to the final Winnie the Pooh special of the original trilogy, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2. This one centers mostly around the bouncy trouncy Tigger, because, as I mentioned, who doesn't like Tigger? This one's gonna be a little awkward. So a few years ago here at Watchwaddle, we made this one reference in one of our playlist specials.
Hey, how old were you when you realized that the teacher in the Breakfast Club was actually right?
Probably about the same age I was when I realized Rabbit just wanted a nice garden. And here comes Tigger just jumping all over everything.
Okay, here's the thing. I love Tigger. He's a fun guy. But he's kind of a pain in the neck. Okay, so let's back up. The story starts with Tigger bouncing everyone. Pooh, Piglet, and of course, Rabbit, ruining his garden in the process. Fed up, Rabbit decides they should unbounce Tigger. So they plan to get him lost and then find him the next day. Not really sure how that's going to unbounce him, but whatever, it didn't work anyway because Tiggers can't get lost. After this, it's winter and snow covers the 100-Acre Woods. Tigger takes Little Roo out for some fun. But while bouncing around, they both end up stuck in the top of a tree. Tigger vows to never bounce again if he can get down. Which he does, through the help of a very clever meta joke where the narrator turns the book sideways and gets him down. I love that. Anyway, now that he's back on the ground, Rabbit very angrily holds him to his promise. But through peer pressure from his friends that don't get their garden ruined, he lets it go. Okay, so here's the thing. Watching stuff from an adult perspective allows you to notice things you didn't notice before. Was Walter Peck legally right? Did Danielson bully first? Was Andy Dufresne actually guilty? Nowadays, a lot of these viewpoints get brought up, especially with the internet. But despite any of these, the real question you have to ask yourself is, does it change anything for you? Tigger was always a carefree spirit, bouncing and enjoying life. Well, he still is, at least for me. Understanding Rabbit's pain doesn't make me automatically hate Tigger. I joke, of course, but I don't see him doing it in malice. If anything, it kind of made me wonder how much of a pain I was as a kid. I must have driven my family nuts. You all hear me confess that, right? But anyway, all is forgiven at the end, and they all start bouncing together and having fun. Even Christopher Robin is bouncing with them. Geez, is that kid out in the snow with a coat and shorts? Is he from England or New Jersey? Oh wow, I really have turned into an adult. At any rate, this is a good special, and the perfect way to close out the original trilogy. But there were many more Pooh specials after this, and we'll get to more of them eventually. But in the meantime, this continues to get the 5 ducks. Check it out and have yourself a bouncy, trouncy, fun time. Hello, folks. So, last time on the VCR, I covered the original 3 Winnie the Pooh featurettes. But there are a lot more Winnie the Poohs out there than that. In 1977, the 3 were spliced together into a full-length feature, with new animation linking them. There was also a 4th featurette made in the 1980s, A Day for Eeyore. Plus, there was also a children's show with actors in costumes, a Saturday morning TV show, The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and several other movies created in the decades that followed. However, the one I'm going to look at today is an odd one, to say the least, and not exactly an official one at that. In fact, it's only available on a bootleg. Yeah, you're not going to be seeing this on Disney Plus anytime soon. Heck, they had a hard enough time getting the Muppet Show on. Yeah, you're still missing that Brooke Shields episode, guys. Anyway, this is Apocalypse Pooh. And you're probably wondering, what in the heck is Apocalypse Pooh? Okay, so get this. In 1987, Todd Graham combined clips from Winnie the Pooh's featurettes with the famous Francis Ford Coppola movie. No, not that one, but that would have been hilarious. No, Apocalypse Now. So, if you're unfamiliar, here's a quick summary. Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, is sent on a secret mission by the American government through the Vietnam jungle during the war to assassinate Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando, who had gone insane. There's way more to the film than that, and Coppola throws so much insanity at you at once, it's hard to keep track. But it's a very well-made film, superbly acted, and very memorable. Be as that may, you're probably wondering, how on earth can that possibly sync up with Winnie the Pooh? Well, surprisingly, really well. Despite the film's politics, which can actually be viewed from both sides, the film is actually really good at showing memorable images and memorable lines. This is what Todd Graham was clearly taking advantage of. So Apocalypse Pooh opens the way Apocalypse Now opens, with a shot of the Vietnam jungle in slow motion getting napalmed. But instead of hearing the end by the Doors, you hear the opening theme deep in the 100-acre woods. Then, you see Winnie the Pooh in front of the mirror doing his exercises, but instead of that audio, you hear Willard's narration. So in other words, every time you see Apocalypse Now, you hear Winnie the Pooh. Every time you see Winnie the Pooh, you hear Apocalypse Now. The task that Todd Graham totally pulled off was making these sync up perfectly. If you're as familiar with both these as I do, you can clearly see the seams, but if you're not as familiar, you do kind of wonder, wow, they actually work together pretty well. Probably one of the hardest things was picking the characters out. I admit I didn't really buy Dennis Hopper coming out of Piglet, but Duvall's voice coming out of Gopher totally nailed it. Above all, the most hilarious thing is hearing Eeyore's voice coming out of Brando's character. That just makes you laugh out loud. There's really nothing more to say about it. It is just a one-note joke. But again, it's a pretty good experiment to see what kind of character can sync up with another type of movie. It's fun. It's a game. Admittedly, this could appear like it's a bit controversial, what with it dealing the topic of a war, but it really is mostly just taking advantage of movie scenes. Memorable movie scenes at that. We've all quoted lines from Apocalypse Now, but I feel this is more just taking advantage of film industry. I myself saw Apocalypse Now in 1999 during its 20th anniversary release, and I was so impressed by the way it looked, I actually made my own animated version. All seriousness, one of our third in fact, animated features we created back in 1999 was a version of Apocalypse Now. You don't forget images like the characters coming out of the water or the people skiing on the boat. It's not trying to offend, nor is it trying to make a point, it's just trying to replicate a famous scene. If you're interested in film and film experimenting, then I would definitely check this out. Heck, I think Brad Jones should cover this on his DVD-R specials. A rating seems irrelevant for something like this, but if you're really interested in film experimentation, I would say check it out. Oh, and if anybody wants to see a version of mine, let me know in the comments. I would love to put it up if I could figure out a way through the legal rights.